And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata. And this is it, folks. This is the final week of power rankings for the 2023 MLR season. Week 18 is in the books. And man, it really feels like it just went like that. But this is going to be the final power rankings of the 2023 season. This last week was as crazy as it's ever been. A lot of moving around, some maybe controversial decisions on what teams moved how much. We'll go into it when we review the final week of action. But everything is now set for the playoffs, or what the MLR is calling the MLR Championship Series. We'll go into that when we preview the two games, the semifinal games going into next weekend. But man, a lot to do in this video. Also, too, the big announcement of who won our Rugby411 Super Brew MLR Pick'em pools. Yeah, just a lot of fun. So as always, thank you very much for everybody that has been following my videos this entire season. This is it. We'll also be comparing this final ranking to my way too early preseason predictions. Man, I'm gonna be honest. Last season I did much better. This season I really was pretty off with my picks. But we'll go over it when we get there. So let's get into it. First of all, the final team, the team in the final last spot, number 12, has been pretty much there this entire season. They've been struggling all season. The Toronto Arrows, the Canadian representatives of Major League Rugby, they lost a heartbreaker this week, 24-26 to NOLA Gold. It was as close as it can get. Going into the game, again, Toronto looked good in the first half the prior week when they went against San Diego. Granted, it was San Diego, the number one team in the entire Major League Rugby. But, this is NOLA. Maybe Toronto could hold on a little bit more. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be so. Toronto was up 10-7 by the half. Unfortunately, in the second half, NOLA Gold just started scoring tries. There was a moment, a weird, interesting moment, where York Lions Stadium went black. The lights completely went out. Unfortunately, it only lasted a couple of minutes before they came back on. But that power surge and the power coming back wasn't enough to help Toronto. Toronto did come in close, though. They had a last-second try by Liam Bowen at the last minute. Unfortunately, they couldn't capitalize any further than that. And unfortunately, Toronto ended up losing by just 2 points to cap off a pretty disappointing season for them. Only one win in the entire season. Granted, they also had 2 draws, but definitely a season that Toronto would try to forget going into next season in 2024. Next team up, Rugby ATL. Staying in number 11 after losing to Old Glory, 28-36. Wasn't a very exciting game, to be honest. I'll go a little bit more into detail when we talk about Old Glory, because I feel this win says a lot more about Old Glory than ATL. ATL already out of the playoff picture, but Old Glory pounding on them, 36-28. Atlanta stays at number 11. Now, the next game, a little bit more exciting, as it was between two teams that have been struggling all season to get more wins under their franchise belts. This was going to determine which franchise would get their 3rd win in their entire franchise history. Would it be the Dallas Shackles or the new kids on the block, the Chicago Hounds? It was another close one, 29-28. Unfortunately, it was in favor of the Chicago Hounds. So staying at number 10, the Dallas Shackles, who were able to get the most wins in franchise history this season with 2, but struggled to find that 3rd win of the season. The game really went back and forth. Both sides were going off on each other, and then they literally started going off on each other as there was a huge fight Literally, punches were being thrown. In the resulting of this, the first time ever that I've ever seen, 5 red cards. 5 red cards. Not yellow cards, but 5 red cards. So 5 players, 3 from the Chicago side, 2 from the Dallas side, were thrown out of the game. Most red cards I've ever seen. I'm sure most red cards ever given out in one game in Major League history. And then to make things even worse, several minutes later, Luke Hardy from the Chicago Hounds was given a yellow card. And then there was a penalty try a couple minutes later, so another Chicago player was taken off. Chicago had at one time 10 players on the field. They had 5 players off of the field. I've never seen anything like that before in my... Granted, I haven't watched rugby for a long time, but in my over 5 years of watching rugby, I've never seen a game where 5 players were off on one side. 10 players on the Chicago field. In the end, Chicago was given in total 7 penalty cards, 3 reds, 4 yellows. Again, I believe that's a record for any team. Dallas, once again, both sides have come in really close contests, and this was another one. Dallas had a chance to win at the end. Unfortunately, they came up short 29-28. Honestly, this season had a lot to do with Dallas's penalty kicking. They were, again, very bad this time around, only 1 for 3 off of the tee. They struggled all season. A lot of those close games that Dallas ended up losing could have been could have ended differently if they had a solid kicking player, a player with a solid kicking skill to maybe make up the difference off of the tee. In the end, though, got to give a shout out to Dallas. Dallas ended last season with no wins. They got 2 this season. They've looked so much better this season. Talk about a culture, talk about finding a playing style, an Argentinian playing style. I feel Dallas is a team that's going to be on the rise. Sam Gala, the number 1 draft pick of last season's MLR draft, looked great playing in this season. He is definitely a future superstar in the making. So Dallas has a lot going for them. I'll go a little bit more into detail with Chicago, who's now in the number 9 spot. Again, granted, they've won 3 games this season. Honestly, as I talk about them a little bit more when I talk about my way too early MLR predictions, Chicago really underperformed this season with the roster that they had. They definitely should have won a lot more games. Only winning 3, it was an odd thing. A lot of people, including myself, wonder what went wrong in Chicago. Hopefully they'll start to learn a little bit more and start to grow and possibly become a better team. Right now, I feel Dallas, even though Dallas lost this game, though by 1 point, I feel Dallas is the team that's trending upwards going into next season. Chicago still has a lot of questions to answer. I also did a little research. If you go to MLR majorleaguerugby.com and you look up their disciplinary section, they explain when a penalty card is given, the disciplinary committee, whoever that is in Major League Rugby, will review every card that's given and either issue a suspension or not, depending on what they feel. If the penalty card was more severe than the penalty was more severe than the card was given. So looking at the fights, from what I understand, only 2 players were actually given suspensions. I don't know if more suspensions are on the way, bigger suspensions. But right now, Macklin Jones from Chicago and Conrad Rora from Dallas were both given a 3-week suspension. Technically, those suspensions go into almost any national level game. So technically, Conrad Rora has a couple of games that he's playing with Argentina. So he will be suspended. He could serve a suspension with those games. If neither players play any national games between now and the next Major League Rugby season, then they will start the season with a 3-week suspension. Again, if you want more information on what the fallout is and all of this, watch MajorLeagueRugby.com, the disciplinary section, a really nice, transparent way to keep track of what is going on with players who have committed maybe 1 too many penalties, and if there's any further suspensions given to them. So really, kudos to Major League Rugby for allowing us access to see that transparency. Moving on. to the number 7 spot. We already talked about them. Nolo Gold. Granted, even though they won, and this was something I had to think about quite a bit, I actually had to slide them down a spot from number 7 to number 8 simply because of all the other teams that were winning, that were more impressive wins, and some of the other teams that were losing. I believe just barely beating Toronto in Toronto, the worst team in the league. Doesn't necessarily warrant them to move up, and it definitely warrants them to slide down because of the other teams that were playing. Another team that had to slide down as well, unfortunately, even though they made the playoffs, the Houston SaberCats sliding down to the number 7 spot from number 4 after losing a one-sided thumping from the best team in the Eastern Conference, maybe the best team going into the playoff season, is the New England Free Jacks. Houston lost 24-47. It was like I said, it was a thumping by New England. Now, the biggest thing, I'll talk about this when we get to New England, but honestly, Houston, they just looked really lost, which is very shocking because they have a playoff game going in next week. And if they play the way that they played against New England, now granted, New England is a really, really good team. I mean, they look hot going into the playoffs. And honestly, if you watched last season, the hottest 2 teams going into the playoffs were the Seattle Seawolves and Rugby New York Ironworkers. Both of those teams, coincidentally, made it to the Championship Shield game. So right now, New England is looking really good. Houston looks like they're struggling a bit. It doesn't look good for them as they head into their playoff game against Seattle. Though Seattle might be struggling as well. We'll talk about them a little bit more as we move on to the power rankings. Speaking of New York drops a spot after a unexpected loss, 33-44 to the Utah Warriors. So you're defending reigning Major League Rugby champions, ending the season with a couple of losses. New York at one point was looking like they were surging back up after a lot of their injured players were coming back. This time around, it looks like they are starting to struggle again. Going into the game, shout out to Dylan Fawcett, the Butcher, for scoring his 40th MLR try in MLR history, the most tries scored by any player, the big 4-0. Amazing performance by Dylan Fawcett in this game, but of course that wasn't unfortunately enough for the win. New York got close though. 9 minutes left in the game. They were down by 5. Unfortunately, Utah scored at the very last second to put the game away. But honestly, if you just look performance-wise, New York, just like Houston, looked kind of lost in this game. And again, not a great thing to look at when we're going into the playoff picture because New York has a date with this team heading into the playoffs. Oh, glory. Defeating Atlanta 36-28, so they moved up a couple of spots, all the way from number 9 to number 5 because of such a great performance against Atlanta, and everybody else just kind of sliding down. Old Glory motivated. They needed a bonus point win to get a possible playoff home field advantage in the playoffs. They looked great against Atlanta. Unfortunately, even though New York lost their game, they got a bonus point win for 4 tries scored. So unfortunately for Old Glory, even though they're higher up in this power rankings, New York ends up securing the home pitch advantage. But hey, I'll tell you guys, a little spoiler, I don't know. It's hard to favor New York in this game against Old Glory because Old Glory looked really, really good. New York looked very, very flat. So we'll see what happens with a 1-week time period to see which team ends up showing up when they play in Mount Vernon for the Eastern semifinal game. Moving on to the top 4, our top 4 elites. Sadly sliding down a spot, the Seattle Seawolves losing to San Diego. Biggest game of the season. But man, between two powerhouses, the scoreline, 40-19. Seattle, again, another team. Now, granted, this game was a little odd. There was a lot of people that were not playing. On the Seattle side, there's no AJ Alatimu, there's no JP Smith. For San Diego, no Will Hooley, no Nate Osberger. There was a lot of players that were benched. Interestingly enough, San Diego looked like they had a lot more of their regulars playing, like Maananu, because possibly having to go into a bye. I've learned with rugby, you want your players to play more than rest, just to make sure that there's a consistency. Seattle looked like they rested a lot more players because they do have a playoff game coming up next week against Houston. So a little hard to really judge this game, whether or not Seattle could play at 100%. But again, the scoreline, both teams didn't have their star players, and in the end, San Diego won 40-19. So again, kind of not what you want going into a playoff game. Now, granted, Seattle will host Houston in next week's playoff game, and again, beating Seattle in Starfire Stadium is hard, but not a good way to end the season for Seattle. As I mentioned before, Seattle last season was on a hot streak, and honestly, personal story. I was really scared because at that point, the LA Giltinis were in the playoffs. And I was thinking, man, if there was a team that I didn't want us to play before going into the Major League Rugby Championship, was the Seattle Seawolves because they looked really, really good. And then, of course, if you know, LA ended up getting eliminated and we ended up closing the franchise. So in the end, Seattle boosted their way through and they tore everybody up on their way to the MLR Championship game, just falling short to New York. So again, Seattle not having the momentum they had last year. We'll see if that will affect them as they go into playoff contention. Now, big jump for the number 3 spot, the Utah Warriors, with that big impressive win over your reigning defending New York Ironworkers, reigning defending MLR champions, the New York Ironworkers. So Utah jumping up from the number 6 spot to number 3. Again, not much to say about this game other than just very, very impressive play by Utah. Utah had nothing to play for. New York looks very dumbfounded. Sad to see that Utah ended up being on the outs of the playoff picture. Oddly, that Utah ended up playing better than Houston did, and Houston ends up going into the playoffs. But Utah is that team that, man, they just... when they're hot, they're hot. When they're not, they're really, really not. And that inconsistency must be frustrating for a team that by all rights should be playoff bound. Now, going into your top 2, no surprise throughout this whole season. We'll just go straight into it. New England Free Jacks number 2 and the San Diego Legion number 1. Both teams are the top teams in their respective conferences. Both get the byes. New England, I do want to say real quick, unfortunately, Bodine Waka, who was their star player last season, was able to come back this season after a stint in Japan. Got hurt really early in this game against Houston. Don't know what his status is. Hopefully, he's not gonna be out of the playoffs because that's a big hurt for New England to lose out on Bodine Waka. But in his place, got to give a shout out to Reese McDonald, who ended up doing a phenomenal job replacing Bodine Waka on the last second. 6 for 7 off of the tee, 12 points by himself. It just shows you the depth that New England has in certain positions. Reese McDonald can do scrum, fly half. Of course, you have Jason Patras, who was on the bench taking a rest, who ended up being the top scoring player of this season. And of course, if Bodine Waka is able to play, you have 3 phenomenal fly halves on that team. So a lot of depth for New England. And of course, what to say about San Diego? San Diego has looked impressive this entire season. Honestly, those 2 teams look like right now the 2 teams that will be playing for your Major League Rugby Championship Shield. But we'll find out. We still got a couple weeks of playoffs to talk about. Now, with this being said, let's go into my comparison. This is the final rankings of 2023. Let's go over my way too early predictions for 2023. During the preseason, I'm going to pull them up right here. And I got to say, it is a little embarrassing, but man, you can see how off I was. Now, again, this was way before any preseason game, any games kicking off the season. but you can see I was really off on a lot of things. Now, granted, Seattle had a very good season up to this point. Arguably, they were very close to being in the 1 and 2 spot. New York, again, just they've been struggling the entire season. Started getting hot recently. The loss, of course, to Utah really hurts them a lot. San Diego, I had it as number 3, as in number 1, so that was kind of close. Houston, that loss against New England kind of hurt them as well. Man, the Chicago one. Again, really thought Chicago would be a lot better. That one I was way off on. But not as bad as the number 1 team that I was really off on. I'll get to at the end. Number 6, Old Glory. Not too far from where I had them. That's probably like the one of the few that I got right. Utah at number 7. Atlanta I thought would be a little bit better at number 8. Toronto I thought would do a little bit better, being at number 9, set at the very bottom. NOLA at number 10, somewhat similar. And then here it comes, the one that I was really off on. And I have to apologize to New England fans because a lot of them were upset with my initial ranking of them. But New England, I had at the preseason, my way too early predictions, number 11. There ended up being number 2. And honestly, one of the best teams in the entire league. I was completely off. I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong about that. I thought the loss of Bodine Walker would really hurt New England, but in the end, Jason Potros proved well equipped to fit into the shoes of Bodine Walker. And of course, number 12, Dallas, but Dallas did so much better at number 10. So yeah. So again, these are the predictions way too early, are hard to hit. I was much better the prior season. This one was a complete utter failure, and I'll admit to that. So also too, though, have to say, in my prediction for the MLR championship, I had Seattle and New York. Theoretically, both teams are still in it. Both teams could end up making Shield appearance, but it really does look like, unless there's an upset, San Diego, New England might be the ones making their way to the Shield. All right, now. Announcement to make, which I know one individual is very excited of, are final results of our Super Brew MLR Rugby411 Pick'em Pool. Let's go over the week results first. Bam! And again, I'm embarrassed to say I had a horrible week, but I really had nothing to play for, so I was just shooting for some big upsets. But in the end, BT Woodrow, congratulations, back-to-back Golden Caps. I believe this also might be your 3rd or 4th, so great job, BT. You did great this season. Ended this week 8.5 with the Golden Cap. Number 2, Julie EGW, who's had some very good performances. 7 points, second in this week. James A6117, 6.5, tied with Tex, who I haven't seen in the top 5 in a while, so good for you, Tex. And then rounding out the top 5, MSDRFC 83, Mike, 6.33 points. Now, finally, the final announcement of our winner of the 2023 MLR Super Brew Rugby411 Pick'em Pool. Drum roll. Bam! And there you go. Congratulations to MSDRFC 83. Mike, I've been calling you Matt this whole entire time. I'm so sorry. But Mike, congratulations, brother. Great performance. 120.16 points. Kudos to SD Cal Guy for coming in second. He was always there pretty much for the entire season, just right behind. In the end, MSDRFC 83 Matt was able to pull it off. SD Cal got 113.33 points. And third, Jahaigo, hope I'm pronouncing that right. He was always there too, 107.99. James A66117, our 107.23. And then our cap winner, BT Woodrow, moving up to the top 5, 106.83. Now, not only do I want to congratulate MSDRFC 83 Matt for doing such a great job winning our pool, but I also want to make the big announcement. Very impressive for Matt. Kudos to you. Not only did he win our pool, he won a bunch of other pools, and he finished number 1 out of 282 players, number 1 in the entire United States. Great job for you, brother. And then not only that, out of 3,052 players worldwide, Matt MSDRC 83 finished in second. Good job, brother. That is so impressive. very, very good. This was not an easy season to predict, as evidenced by, a lot of us, including myself. But Matt text Matt texted me. I'm sorry, Mike texted me to ask that he didn't want a T-shirt, which was very nice of him. He actually wanted me to donate his winnings to a charity of my choice, which I really do appreciate, Mike. Thank you very much for allowing me to do this. I'm going to donate to SPCA of the LA branch. SPCA is the Society of Prevention of Cruelty Towards Animals. It is my favorite charity to donate because they really do make a difference in keeping pets, especially ones that have been abused, off the streets and into forever homes. So SPCA, if you're into supporting animals, great charity to donate. I donate to the LA branch, so SPCA LA. I'm going to be donating $50 to them. Thank you, Mike, MSDRFC83, for allowing me to do that. And thank you to everybody that was part of this this pool. We had the most players ever before, and it was a lot of fun. Shout out to my boy Coop. I know you tried really, really hard to win, and I know it kind of fell off at the end. It's the same with all of us. But congratulations again to Matt, and again, I'm Mike. And again, thank you for everybody that played. Hope you will join us again next season. Don't forget, you still can go into the playoffs and pick. I'm just picking the regular season. Playoffs we can still play, but it doesn't change the fact that Mike already won. I'm only doing this regular season, no playoffs involved, and Mike is our winner. But again, you guys can join in the playoffs and vote and pick and see if you get those right. I will be doing my pick'em video for those playoffs next. But again, guys, thank you very much for watching. This is our final rankings. Let me know what you think about them. Let me know how awful my all too early predictions were. And as always, thank you very much for watching my videos, and I'll see you on the pitch.